Hi, this is Meg Riley, and you've joined us for another episode of The VUU. Today we're joined by Donna Redwing and Rebecca Parker. I'll introduce them in just a minute to talk about resistance and resilience. But first, we'll have Michael. Why don't you say your name and where you are, and just say howdy to everybody.
Hey everyone, this is Michael Tino. I'm joining you today from my office in Mount Kisco, New York, and it's wonderful to see you.
Excellent. Behind the chalice, we have Terry Bernor, our new tech person, coming in doing the broadcast here and also the podcast. So whether you're here watching or listening later, you can thank Terry for all of that support. I wanted to mention that we do a lot of shows actually about resistance and resilience. We have Black Lives of UU on every month, and that's often what they're talking about. We had Peggy Clark come and talk about Standing Rock a few weeks ago, and that certainly was a show about resistance and resilience. And I just wanted to flag that as we talk about this today, it's not a new topic, nor is it necessary only because of the election. People of color have known about resistance and resilience and taught many of us for hundreds of years. And I think that I would be remiss if I didn't say that there's a lot that we can learn from writing and talking to and watching leaders of color right now. I'm also really excited to bring in two longtime activists who have been pillars in my life of learning about how to resist and how to act. Leaders of color right now. I'm also really excited. I'm getting feedback. That didn't work so well. So Donna Redwing is somebody who I met in 1992. I was thinking about it. We met in a meeting in Washington, D.C. following horrible votes that year on LGBT people. Donna was running programs out in Oregon, which she'll talk about, against just a horrifically vile and assaultive measure about LGBT people. She's been an activist before that and ever since. Right now, she's just retired as the executive director of One Iowa, Iowa's largest GLBTQ organization, which works towards full equality from cradle to grave. She's been an activist in the struggle against AIDS, in the fight against the privatization of prisons, in economic justice issues, and in many other things that she can draw from today. So Donna, welcome and thank you. And it's wonderful to see you, Grandma.
It's so good to see you. Thank you. Thank you.
A wonderful thing. And tangentially to all of her things, for several years, she and I spoke together each morning to talk about at 6 a.m. to talk about our mutual work as I came into CLF and she was running a nonprofit just to share and to build resistance and resilience there. Our other guest is Dr. Rebecca Ann Parker. Rebecca is the Emerita president of Starr King. Did I get that right? The Emerita president? Yeah. President Emerita of Starr King School for the Ministry, where she served for 25 years. And since she left then, she's done many things. This year, she's primarily been at All Souls Church in Washington, D.C., where she has helped with preaching and pastoral care and teaching. And Rebecca, I was especially excited to come because of her work about how congregations can be places that build resistance and resilience. So I'm excited just to jump right into that conversation. Donna, let's start with you. I mean, you've worked in so many issues where it's gotten very, very personal, the assaults against you and your family. And I'm sure that this election has brought back some of the worst of that for you. I'm wondering how it's going for you and your family right now.
Sure. Right after the elections, my wife said to me she felt like she was suffering from PTSD, that the language that was being used, the fears that she and others were having, brought her back to 1990, 91, 92, which was really the beginning of the culture wars, as you'll remember. In Oregon, the radical religious right tried to splay open the Constitution to declare that LGBT people were second-class citizens, and to create a whole list of things that would have, in some cases, imprisoned LGBT people, in other cases, taken licensure away from them. There really would have been a second class of people. And I think we all thought, well, nobody's gonna vote for that. And in fact, a lot of people did. I think it was 44% of the electorate did vote for that. And in that time, I mean, I think you can talk about it as politics, but it wasn't politics as usual. It impacted everyone. People were hurt. People were murdered. Hattie Mae Cohen and Brian Mock, an African-American lesbian and a gay man, were firebombed as they slept. They choked and they burned and they died because somebody targeted them based on the rhetoric of that campaign. Churches were arsoned. Our family, we were, I got a call one night from law enforcement saying that my family had been put on the top of the white resistance hit list. And from that point on, our family was protected. They gave me a cell phone, and that was back in the day when cell phones were as big as your shoe, right? This big clunky thing. We had a hut button in our home, and they sent a police officer to our house every night to make sure we were still there. I'm not sure how it happened, but it was always a really wonderful lesbian police officer, so that was kind of nice. But we lived in fear for our lives. There were more than 1,800 documented acts of violence against LGBT people and people who were perceived to be in that year. So we can't just look at politics as simply politics or politics as usual. We know that that there are consequences. But I sometimes think we forget that the rhetoric, the language, the stuff that goes on impacts every one of us, and it gives some people permission to do horrible things. Last night I went to an event with Charlie Cook, who's one of my favorite political analysts, and he can't figure it out, but he's frightened. I think we need to go back to our playbooks, and I think we need to figure out, I can only speak for me, I need to figure out what it is I want to do, how I'm going to do it, and then do it with everything I have. I can't do everything. I've learned that. I don't know everything. I've learned that. But there are things I do very well. And I have to figure, what do I want to play, the inside game or the outside game?
Thanks, Donna.
You're welcome.
Yeah, we will be talking more about what we can do. Rebecca, why don't you share how it's been for you and in Washington, D.C.? And I know you guys got a whole lot of national attention for the service right after the election. And how is it there? You're dealing with a lot of federal employees, among other things, who I'm sure are freaked out.
Thanks, Meg, and thanks, Donna, for what you just said. It's great to be together today in this forum. In Washington, D.C., the texts and emails to the ministers at All Souls Unitarian Church started happening at 4 in the morning after the election results began to be, the outcome began to be clear. And one of the things that we first did was gather that evening, the day after the election, for our regular monthly Vesper service. And we were so glad that we already had this practice in place. We already had the practice at All Souls, thanks to Abby Tennis, who organized this, Reverend Abby Tennis, when she was the intern at All Souls, a once-a-month evening Vesper service that was centered on prayer, meditation, music, candle lighting. And usually we had about 100 people come to that Vesper service. But the night after the election, people just streamed into the church. The bell was tolling in the church tower, and it was like a river of human fear, hope, confusion, desire, distress, and most of all, a deep desire to be together with other people in a place of spiritual grounding. And that itself was, moving to me, to see where people immediately turned out of their sense of distress at the outcome of the election, and their feeling that many, many lives were going to be even at more risk than they were, including the non-human lives and the ecosystems and the planet. So many lives at greater risk. And we already were seeing a rise of white nationalism already seeing, Ferguson had already happened. Standing Rock was already happening. Global warming was already happening. The denial of global climate change was already happening. Mother Emanuel already happened. Orlando had already happened. We were not in an entirely new situation, but we were at a tipping point where the tide of hatred and violence was, it has felt like floodgates were open, and permission given to people. And the statistics on the rise, as Donna was saying, the rise in violent hate crimes and acts since the election is, it's just been heartbreaking, and we have been here before. So that night, right after the election, people gathered at the church, and it's Vespers, the sanctuary is lit with candles. As I said, the bell was tolling, and we didn't do any political speech that night, except to just acknowledge that, the briefest acknowledgement that it was important to be together. But what we did that night was chant from the Taizé, France tradition, beautiful chant, within the darkest night you kindle the fire, the flame that never dies away. And we chanted, stay with me, abide with me, watch and pray. And we held silence for 15 minutes. And there was a period in the ritual when when altars were set up around the sanctuary, various places, and people were invited to come light candles or do a walking meditation in the sanctuary. And this, the church is packed, and people just streamed forward in the candlelight while the music was going. Parents came with their small children and knelt down at the altar and lit candles. It was very moving. I especially remember one of our expectant mothers who stands at the altar with her hands over, her child in her womb, and just praying. So after that gathering of prayer and music, we had some talking circles for people, and as people spoke together, they spoke about how much they needed this moment of spiritual community coming together, and this grounding in prayer and in chant and in beauty, and an opportunity to take a physical action that expressed their prayers and their concern and their lamentation. And that the ritual, people again and again around the circle said, the ritual helped me move out of my numbness into my feelings, and now I can move through my feelings into thinking about the ways we need to be committed to what we most love now, and the actions we need to take, and the different ways maybe we need to live or come together or work. So that was a long way of saying this, but I wanted to make it really concrete to share with you this place of ritual and prayer and spiritual community is life-giving in times of national distress, just as it is in times of personal distress. And they're really, all of our successful movements for major social change have had a component of spiritual presence, of prayer, of resistance that comes through music, and the things that allow us to fully feel, fully connect with one another, fully connect with something deeper that we trust can carry us on the rivers of justice and the rivers of compassion. So I'll stop there for now so others can. But I just
thank you, Rebecca. That's really beautiful. And Donna, that makes me think, I mean, you and I were both in the GLBT movement when to be a person of faith was to be equated with right-wing dictators pretty much, and loathed and distrusted. And you especially in institutional roles took leadership in bringing the religious and spiritual communities into that movement. How do you, looking back now all these years, how do you feel like that impacted the movement? And is there something we can learn from that now, as a lot of unchurched folks and millennials who are spiritual but not religious are suddenly saying maybe a spiritual community that's actually gathered could be of help?
Well, if you will remember, I think the first time we did that, and you helped me with that, I believe, we invited Andrew Sullivan to speak. And Andrew said he would do it. We were inviting all of these faith leaders together. He said he would do it if he could choose the subject and the title. And I think the title was Sex, Politics, and Religion. And we had standing room only, if you'll remember that. But yeah, I can remember when people would not meet in a church, not even a Unitarian church. I can remember meeting in a church and have somebody climbing up onto the altar to cover the religious symbols. I can remember when the church or when the faith community was seen as the enemy. Because, you know, in the late 80s and early 90s, it was some communities of faith that were in charge of the culture war, and they were very clear about who they were and why they were doing what they were doing. I think there's a great deal to learn. You know, we know that a number of faith communities have been through their time of discernment and have really moved on LGBT issues and other issues. Right now, I'm working with various Methodist ministers who stand on both sides of that line, and we're working through some civil dialogues to just kind of parse some things out. Here in Iowa, what I've found is the more progressive Christian community, the Unitarian Universalist community, and the Jewish community have really embraced the most vulnerable and those who will be most impacted by the politics of the day. What we've also seen is an entrenchment of the more conservative faith communities, and what I've been doing is meeting with those leaders too, and those have been very interesting conversations. The head of the family leader here in Iowa, which is the group that wakes up every morning to do battle around LGBT rights, reproductive health, I mean, on and on and on. I meet with their leadership every 6 to 8 weeks, and trying to put a face and a voice and a story to what they think of when they think of our community. And it's been interesting. The tone has changed. They haven't turned 180 degrees, but they're moving. They're moving very slowly, but they're moving in a direction that's a little more respectful. We have agreed to a code of civility, how we deal with each other and how we deal with individuals. It's one of the most fascinating and most difficult pieces of work I do. When I walk into the Unitarian Church, I know I'm among friends. When I walk into a room with the radical religious right, it's very hard. But I think as we move forward, we can't simply ignore our opponents. We can't always believe that they're the enemy on every level and every issue. We need to find common ground. We need to begin to know each other. And I think what I've learned is I need to find their humanity, and I need to open myself up so they find mine. It's really, really hard work.
Yeah, it's not work right now that I can do. I have been doing deep canvassing and other work, and someone said, let's talk deep canvassing, and I said, yeah, right now I got to line up resistance. Like I know they're not going anywhere, and we'll come back, but I'm also hoping that, I used to start every speech when I spent those years talking about the religious right all the time with separate the leaders from the followers, right? And I know that a lot of the people who voted and think that this is a good thing are not going to want their kids to be bullying other kids at school, and are not going to want them to be assaulting people on the streets. And I'm hoping, I think one of the things that wasn't true then is this, everybody can be in their own news bubble. learning what they learn with no intersection sometimes with reality. And that's been one of my real challenges. I spent a sabbatical month down in Missouri talking to people in the country, and there's almost like a brainwashing thing that feels like it's impenetrable when people have their own facts and they've seen them and their authorities have said that they're true. And so yeah, I think it's going to be a long, slow process of trying to knit things together there that I don't yet have any patience for.
Sure. Yeah. And I mean, that's a piece of the work that I do. I need to figure out, and we spoke about this a little earlier, you know, there's the inside work, there's the work here in Iowa, we're completely red. We have a state legislature that has now the will and the numbers to do anything they want, and the governor who will bless it. So, you know, what do we do there? And then I think every good movement, you also have the outside work, the work that horrifies some people, you know, remember ACT UP, Lesbian Avengers. I mean, I remember in Oregon once a politician said, Donna, I meet with you because I don't want to meet with them. And he was referring to some ACT UP people who used to vomit red, white, and blue every time they went into his office, you know? So I think we need theater. I think we need kind of the drama of the outside work. But we also have to do the inside work. And that means understanding how things work. You know, can we maintain legislation or get legislation that supports us? Or maybe that's not the way we go. Maybe it's a board, you know, maybe it's a regulatory piece. Maybe we do it on local levels. What I'm seeing is a generation of people who didn't get civics in high school or junior high school, who don't know how things work. And if you don't know how things work, you can't work with them. So yeah, for me, I decided I was taking, you know, through the holidays to really figure out how I can be intentional and effective in my life around the things that I care about. And, you know, I'm still weighing lots of different things. We can't be everywhere. We can't do everything. We have to know where will be the most effective. And I haven't quite figured that out yet, except at the end of the year, I'll be retired. So what I will have is time.
I've been thinking about that. All these retiring baby boomers with great skills and gifts. I was thinking about that before the election. Thinking of especially all the women that I know who are stepping out of paid work and now, you know, don't answer to anyone and can.
That's part of it. It's not just the time.
Yeah. Yep.
It's not answering. Yeah.
The freedom. Yeah. Hey, Michael, you've been quiet. You want to come in?
Yeah, Donna, I'm glad that you brought up ACT UP in this conversation because you mentioned being brought back to your organizing in the early 90s. And I think part of what I'm feeling, especially on today, being World AIDS Day, is being brought back to the mid 80s, to a time when government and much of society was actively hostile to my very being, who I knew I was, even though I wasn't able to tell anyone at that point. And the groups like ACT UP, who sort of vocally declared their humanity at every turn, just refused to be silent in the face of forces.
Uh-oh.
Is someone gone?
You were kind of turning into Darth Vader there a little bit. In the face of forces that, I'm sorry.
I would rather that we just didn't exist.
Yeah, and yeah, it was a time when.
And at that point in time, I didn't have a spiritual community, and now I'm the leader of one, or a leader of one, and just thinking, you know, especially as you were talking, Rebecca, about the importance of ritual and sacred space that is affirming and humanizing of what needs to be done differently this time, and what we can learn about what was successful, and what we can learn about what we can do better, so that I'm struck. I'm sorry to babble, but I'm struck by this. We've been there before, and of course I understand that there are communities who never left there.
And a generation that hasn't been there before.
Right.
An entire generation that, at least in Iowa, has lived with full legal protection.
Right, and so I see despair in our youth, and want to make sure that they know that they have folks who've been through this and who will get them through it. So there's not really a question there, but I'm glad you brought up ACT UP, and I wonder if there are things that we can do differently / better this time through the crisis.
I'd like to respond to that a little bit, Michael. It's really good today on World AIDS Day to remember the work of ACT UP, and I don't know if we can do better than ACT UP did. I mean, and I'm just, as you're speaking, I'm just remembering the chant, "I'm here, I'm queer, we're here, we're queer," and just that
Queer Nation, yeah.
It's just that, and of course we just passed Transgender Remembrance Day too, and it seems like every week we're needing to recognize and mourn and protest the death of another transgender person, and so we've made progress, and we have always so much more to do, and the cyclical nature of these waves of moving forward and experiencing backlash, that's part of what we've been here before. One of the really young adults in our congregation came to the church the day after the elections and just hung out at the church all day. She said, "Can I just be here?" I said, "Of course," and we talked. And we talked in part about how there have been setbacks before, and she said to me, "But were they this bad?" And I said, "I think the difference in this moment is that the urgency on the global climate change issues, it feels like it's such, the clock is going to run out, and that feels different than where we were with the culture wars in the 70s and the 80s, and even in the 60s and the 50s. But so that there, every moment has its own particularities. But I also think part of, I'm just going to stay with this theme of the place of spirituality and ritual in resilience, and is one of the things we do in life-giving spiritual community. So let me make an aside, because not all religion is good. Religion has not necessarily a force for good in the world at all. A lot of what we are having trouble with now, religion has advocated for hate and fear and violence and denial of what's going on with the ecosystem. So religion, the question is not whether we need religion, it's whether our religion we've got is good religion or bad religion. And bad religion is tremendously harmful and has to be engaged. But in the good religion mode, I would like to say a word of encouragement. Part of what we do is recount the story, the legacy, the heritage of resistance and resilience. And this is something we do in sacred community. We tell the story of what happened before. And some of that goes for Christians and Jews, that goes back to the biblical literature, because those are stories of resistance and resilience in the face of injustice and oppression. And the telling and retelling of the Passover story through a ritual every year trains the soul to feel that in the presence of pharaohs, there still can be pathways to liberation and new life. But I'm also thinking, so telling the stories across the generations and building multi-generational community and through ritual is one of the ways that happens, that the stories are passed on. We need the stories. I was, as Meg, when you said we wanted to talk about resistance, and today I was remembering the story of the little village in France that sheltered the Jewish children and saved hundreds of lives of children during the Holocaust, this village Les Chambons in France. And this is one of the stories to remember. When one of the children who survived that, who was saved there, came back as an adult to visit the village because he had a question, which was, why did you do this? Why did this little village risk the lives of everybody and successfully shelter in farmhouses throughout the community so many children and save so many lives? And he went around and interviewed and talked to people. He wanted to know why, how did you do this? Why did you do this? And the answer that emerges in the documentary film he made about this going back was that this was a community of French Huguenots. They were a religious minority. And the documentary film, Weapons of the Spirit, shows them gathering to sing their hymns. And they sang their hymns about their ancestors who were faithful to their deepest religious values in spite of threat and violence, and their prayers to be as strong as their ancestors. And so this rehearsed story of we can stand by what we most love, even in the face of terrible opposition, was already woven into the depths of their souls and their being by their religious community. So when the critical moment came, they just acted out of their deep faith that was already formed. And the most touching thing in that film is when the child, now adult, who was saved in this village goes back to the farmer in whose home he was sheltered and said, why did you do this? And the old farmer says, there are people who wouldn't. There are people who wouldn't. And what I think is so important about deep religious community is it shapes our souls to have the capacity for compassion, courage in the face of sometimes overwhelming difficulties and odds. And just one more thing about our life here at All Souls Unitarian in DC, the Sunday right after the election, the worship associate stood up at the beginning and read the welcome we read every Sunday. It's been read every Sunday for years. Whoever you are welcome here. We here are welcome people of all genders, all sexual orientations, all gender expressions, just a list of all the people who we welcome, and we're committed to embodying and working towards a beloved community. It's just the regular announcement of welcome that we've been saying every Sunday for years, and the congregation burst into applause. And Rob Hardy's, our wonderful senior minister here, told about this the next week. It's like we already were prepared. We were already prepared for this time.
Mm-hmm. And Rebecca,
yeah.
It seems like, can you hit me? I'm getting in it now. Yeah. It seems like you've talked about the Universalists having rituals of resistance many years ago. And I wonder what that was about. I just kind of dimly remember you talking about this.
I don't know.
No specifics.
I think I dimly remember that too. I'm not sure. What I can say about that is that the old Universalists who emphasize the inclusive love of God, God's embrace of love for all people, and God's will, that desire that all people have life and have life in abundance. I guess they're kind of like those old Huguenots that I was in south of France, where that faith, was so leads you to conclusions about how you should be in the world with other people. So I think that that saying from the old Universalists, underneath are the everlasting arms. They're in this Universalist prayer that we use here, and then that we developed at Starr King. There is a love holding all. We rest in this love. To just the ritualization of that prayer is something I've worked on evolving from the Universalist heritage. We chanted that at that Vesper service too. That universalist affirmation, there is a love holding us, there is a love holding all we love, there is a love holding all. We rest in this love. And our 19th century universalist said, if you believe in a God who's going to divide humanity into those who deserve to live, those who deserve salvation because of what they believe or whatever, and those who deserve eternal damnation, you will become even more cruel than the God you believe in. So that's where, when we embody the universalist rejection of that, of a God who divides people into those who deserve to live and those who deserve to be punished or killed or eternally damned, and instead ritually deepen in our own souls the sense of an inclusive love that holds us all. Then how we are all together, we have to work that out. We have to embody that, but we are starting from a place of a soulful place where our souls are hopefully strong enough, and then the call to be faithful to ourselves completely intersects with our call to be courageous and just in the world. Does that make sense?
It does. So let's go there, because speaking of intersectionality and all people, let's talk about white people a little bit. I mean, white women voted majority for this misogynist abuser, and 94% of Black women voted for Clinton, even though the racism hurt, and 50 whatever % of white women voted for Trump. And Michael, I'm sorry, we all just write off the white men because we expected that. But I don't know about you all, but I have been really thinking about the abject failure of even the white feminist movement. Set aside the racism that's in the white feminist movement, which of course you can't, but even seeing a stalker who talks about pussy grabbing, and like, what would it take for women to say, my humanity is linked to not the white men's, but to these other people? Like, what have we learned from these other struggles, Donna, that you've been part of about intersectionality and where privilege, because I see this happening now. White people are going off into, yeah, anti-racism was good, but now I'm at risk. So let me put myself back in the circle. So,
yeah, well, I wish we could say we learned all kinds of wonderful lessons, but intersectionality, I think, is something that we're not seeing. I don't think we're seeing a real focus on intersectionality. Even within the LGBT community, the T part is often just an add-on, and we all know that. We all know that. We watched our national organizations refuse to include transgender folks for years and years and years and years. When we look at, and I know the LGBTQ world the best, but where is my community on the Religious Freedom Restoration Acts? Where's my community around gun violence? Where's my community around immigration? Where is it around healthcare? Where is it around economic justice? Where is it around race? I don't think we're there yet. I don't think we're there yet. And when I see extraordinarily privileged LGBT persons, all of a sudden scared, all of a sudden nervous, all of a sudden wanting everybody else to get active. Sometimes I ask, where were you last month? I'm sorry,
please don't apologize for that.
It's like the conversation Maggie and I would have if I had a martini or two. Yeah, where is it? Where is it? And those are all the things. I mean, I think what's different now than ever before. Before the elections, what kept me going, it was something Voltaire said. He said, I only had one prayer to God, and it was a small one. It was, please make my enemies ridiculous. And I thought that would save us, that our enemy, Trump, was so ridiculous, he couldn't win. We weren't prepared. I'm sorry, we were not prepared. The segmented communities were not prepared. The LGBT community wasn't prepared. The feminists, we were not prepared for this. We don't know what's going to happen. But all the things that I mentioned, whether it's, you know, religious freedom or guns or immigration, if it's race, whatever, it's all in jeopardy right now. And if we continue to segment ourselves and just protect our own, because we don't understand that our own is really all of us, they win. They win. And that's what they're counting on, isn't it? Meg, you and I have had this conversation around, you know, conservative, right-wing religious folks. They may disagree on a whole bunch of things, right? But they come together. We don't. And well, that's what frightens me the most.
I agree with that. And I wonder if that intersectionality can be part of the prophetic voice of the liberal religious communities. I mean, you know, Rebecca wisely brings us to our Universalist heritage, where Universalists said, you know, God's love embraces us all, no matter who we are, and that brought them to a place of understanding that we're all in this together in a certain way. But I wonder, you know, we're out there declaring that we're all in this together. And we can't, you know, we can't protect queer people unless we're protecting people of color, because those groups intersect, and we can't poor people unless we're protecting women, and vice versa. And I wonder if that's part of the prophetic voice that we need to have as liberal religious people. Maybe I do more than wonder. Maybe I think that that's part of the prophetic voice that we need to have as liberal religious people.
And how does that play out? Because, you know, I know I can't be every place all the time. I know what my strengths are. I know what my weaknesses are. I need to figure out where I can be most effective. So how does it play out? And are there communities that, you know, sometimes seem diametrically opposed on one issue, but can find common ground on another? We don't seem to do very well finding common ground either. Yeah, I think maybe this is a time of real discernment for all of us. Where are we going to land on this? Where are we going to land? And what are we going to do? And how are we going to do it?
Yeah. I have some thoughts about your question, Donna, which I think is so important. And now those of us who've been activists over a lot of decades on a variety of issues that are intersectional issues, you know, we know all the work about coalition building, coalition politics, you know, and that I think that kind of work has to continue. And coalitions we work together where we can, and we agree to disagree where we can't, and then there's all sorts of negotiating work that has to go on in coalitions. I think right now about the Standing Rock kind of coalition between Indigenous activists, and some of the labor unions have been supporting. You know, there's a coalition there, but their interests pull in different directions, and so every time there's a major push in any arena where we come together in coalitions, there's all that human work and that we have to do. So I think we have to continue to do that. But I also think we need, and there's no single strategy. There's just as the issues intersect, the things that move us forward towards just and sustainable life together are on multiple fronts. So I love what you said, no one of us can do everything. No one of our communities can do everything. But all the things that need to be done. And then we need to be connecting them. So we need to do our part, and we need to know what our best part is. And sometimes that question is personal. Can I do the best? And sometimes it's about our communities, what our liberal religious communities or our Unitarian Universalist communities, or I'm also United Methodist. What can United Methodists do best? There's some things, don't let me get on that side of things. We'll come back to the Methodist LGBTQ struggles, which are not over. But so what's our charism? What's our gift? But one thing I think in liberal religious communities, or liberating religious communities, which I think goes further than liberal religious communities, liberating religious communities. One thing I think we're called to do and should be paying attention to doing, and are already doing but need to do even better, is making our liberating religious communities embodiments of intersectional connectedness, so that we have in our religious community an embodied experience of what it feels like when we are really honor the intersections. And then we can take that embodied knowledge, if we experience it, we can advocate for it in other settings as well, like when we're in a coalition politics. If we have experienced spiritual grounding, and if we have experienced the connections across the intersections of various oppressions. So the work we do, and so that's another way of understanding a spiritual basis of resilience, the sacramental understanding. We have to make our communities sacramental places where we have a taste of what it's like to be in beloved community, and from that taste we can bring it also into our other arenas of work. But I think this is very hard for us as liberal. Now I'm going to use liberal religious people, because we may be, clear about the issues of we're going to be anti-racist or about white privilege, but I've seen and experienced heartbreaking ways that our liberal religious communities cannot hold the intersections. Like, we can work on white queer issues, once it becomes people of color queer issues, or we can work on queer issues, but once we're dealing with also Muslim queer people of color, so that kind of intersectional solidarity and faithfulness and understanding of one another, that's deep work. And I could say more about that, but I want to keep our space open for more of us. But that coalition work and building beloved community work is really important now.
And for many of our folks, the only way to experience that embodied is to get out of the congregation and go somewhere else where it is embodied. And I think that's one of the real tensions, is that our folks want to sit in their safe places and have people come in a little bit, and for me, so much of what I've learned has been by being in the community and doing stupid things and making mistakes and being forgiven and going another day. And I think that the propensity for white middle class Unitarian Universalists, that's the community I know best, to want to get it right and only do it if it's right is really going to kill us. And really, it's like I have no patience for it at this point, zero. If, I've been working on the vote recount. Maybe it's a dumb idea. You know what? It gave me something to do over Thanksgiving weekend besides have nightmares and stew. So, I called everyone I knew to get them in Pennsylvania, because 3 people in every precinct had to go file if they wanted a recount. So, I called everyone I knew and did what I could. And all these people were like, well, that's a stupid idea, blah, blah. I didn't tell them they should like what I was doing. I just was figuring out what I could do. And I feel like that sit back and critique, we just don't have space for it. I mean, there are things that are offensive and stupid and oppressive, and we should stop them. But I feel like if people are doing things I'm not called to do right now, like I'm not going to that women's march in DC, but more power to women who feel like that's a good thing to do. Like I'm certainly not going to try to stop everybody until we come up with a plan, because we never do. And I think that belief that if we just critique enough, we'll figure it out is just not what's going to help right now at all. And that's been true in our churches before the election, and that's true about why a lot of our churches are dying, is that they're not willing to take risks in a whole lot of other ways. But I think an opportunity here is to say, experiment. There's just nothing to do but try, just experiment, and also get out of the building and go to the intersectional communities and experience there, and then have it in your body when you go back into the building. And I do see, I don't mean to sound like, and I know how to do this and no one else does, because I don't, and other people do as much as I do. We're all fumbling around together working on it. But I'm really excited when I see people taking risks, even risks that I think, really? That's what you're going to do? I'm still excited that they're taking a risk, particularly a risk into that embodied, intersectional kind of living, Rebecca, that you talk about, and that your legacy at Starr King really was creating that. And I know, and I'll just name that, the embodiment of all of this for many of us, Ibrahim, or as Donna knew him, Elias, that his death is with me all the time, and his presence is with me all the time, as a living touchstone embodiment for so many of us, of holding such multiplicity, of being, by speaking a million languages and just touching so many communities and never fitting in any box. And seeing what that took from him and seeing what that gave to him, I think is part of the legacy that I claim. It's part of who I claim as my living legacy, is that relationship. So, and I think we all know people, and obviously I invited you too, because I think you are two such people. So what do you, Donna, you're obviously ascertaining where you think you have the most influence right now. As you do that, as other people think about doing what you're doing, what do you encourage them to think about?
I'm encouraging them to think, first of all, just think. I think, let's roll it back to what we talked about a little earlier. This is World AIDS Day, right? We know that over 35 million people died. Some of them were our friends. We know that almost 35 million people today are living with HIV, and some of them are our friends. We know that back in the 80s, the fight around the AIDS epidemic was impossible, right? It was only about queers and Haitians and IV drug users, so nobody cared, right? And somehow the AIDS HIV movement became about everyone. And communities of color, straight people, children, communities of faith came together, the health community came together. Barbara Bush lit candles in the White House, remember that? Somehow, and part of the somehow was because people took to the streets, people did the kind of smart theater that frightened people, but made people think. People also work the inside game with Health and Human Services, with the administration, with health communities. And so I guess on this day, I'm looking at how the AIDS movement, the AIDS HIV movement, moved from almost a group of untouchables to something that today so many people are a part of. And we're doing some good work. Here in Iowa, we're going to have legislative nightmares. We could lose everything except marriage. We could basically lose everything except marriage. Everything's going to be torn apart. So there's that. There's what happens on the street. What happens to that Muslim kid who is harassed just because he's waiting for the school bus? What happens to that trans person downtown when they get profiled? I think it's going to be happening on so many levels. The question I'm asking myself is where I can have the most impact. where I can do the most good and where I'm the most needed. And it would be nice if that all lined up nicely. It might not, you know. And then, you know, then I think people need to look at the communities that are doing great work. They need to support those, whether it's their volunteer hours or their investment in funding. What we can't do is we can't be bystanders. We can't sit back and say, "Oh my gosh, this is awful, isn't it? I think I'm going to live in Canada in the summer and Mexico in the winter. That's what I think I'm going to do." No. Stand and fight. Stand and fight. Stand as you can and fight.
Mm-hmm.
Rebecca, what do you got to say to people?
Well, I say amen to everything Donna said, and just a few more thoughts. I agree with you, Meg, that what we don't need is a lot of crabby criticism of our detailed strategies, or that's not the best thing, this would be better. We don't need that right now. What we need is, joyously muddling through together, making mistakes, but taking action. And we need, critical thinking, it does matter, but criticism of one another is not so helpful. And I just keep coming back to what we need more of. I don't mean this, let me say this in as grounded a way as I can. Yes to everything Donna said, stand and fight, and then also every day, every hour, deepen our practice of love. What is the way to be loving in this moment, in this conversation, in this today, and deepen our practice of love constantly. And that includes bringing a loving spirit of support to one another, where the hurt is, where the outcry is, where our own loving towards ourselves, and broadening our sense of what it means to love and what the practice of love looks like. Because the practice of love includes the practice of critical thinking, and it includes the practice of courage. So that's deepen the practice of love. And just on the spirituality of resilience too, I'm thinking a lot about how the public demonstrations we do are forms of public prayer or of embodied experience. Here I am in Washington, D.C. I think I don't have to keep up my gym membership because every day I can be on the streets. I can walk through the streets of the city with different coalitions of people singing and chanting. And I actually, as I do those things, and we were out there for criminal justice, we were out there for Standing Rock just this last week, that is a form of public prayer. Those are sacramental activities. And on World AIDS Day, remember how powerfully important the AIDS quilt was. Cleve Jones is going to be here tonight at All Souls to speak about who started that, the AIDS quilt. Those tangible expressions. This is our form of prayer now. And at Standing Rock, what they're doing is praying. What they're doing is ritual. And that's not the only thing we need to do. Not only spiritual practice, but it is one of our sources of hope and resilience now. And to expand our sense of the forms of where the embodied experience of the intersectionality comes. It comes when we're out there in the street demonstrating. That doesn't necessarily change the minds of the people who were asking to listen to the demonstration. It gives those of us who are demonstrating. That's our prayer. That's our form of prayer. To stand together, to be in the streets, to be in the world, and say, this is what we love, this is what we care for, this is what we're giving our lives to. So that gives us, strengthens and heartens us. That's what I experience about demonstrating. It strengthens and heartens us to be together in the streets. That's what ACT UP did, that's what Ibrahim did, Elias. But it comes back to the practice of love in multiple forms. That's what I have to say for today.
Amen. Thank you so much to both of you for being here. We have come to the end of our hour. And I just want to thank our guests so much for this. Next week, we'll have another old friend, Donna, you'll know his name, Scott Nakagawa, who has spent many years looking at movements and talking about and working on intersectionality, from looking at the far right to looking at the left and everything in between. And he's just a really keen mind, and I'm really excited to hear him talk about how we need to be framing things now. So we'll do that next week. Thank you so much to those of you who have been here live with us, to those of you listening on the podcast. Michael, you got anything you want to say before we go?
I should not have the last word today.
A man who knows, a man who learned something. So anyway, thank you so much. It's been wonderful. I feel strengthened by it, and may we go forward together in unity.
Amen.
Amen.
Amen.